On May 18, 2006, at 3:42 in the afternoon, an American Army captain standing in the lobby of a 5-story concrete building in central Baghdad received a radio message from his battalion commander stationed at the forward operating base designated Task Force Falcon. The message was terse. It consisted of 4 words spoken in the measured tones of a military professional. The words were, "Americans will stand down." That was not an unusual instruction in principle. Tactical situations changed constantly throughout the day in Iraq. Commanders repositioned units based on updated intelligence. Soldiers received orders to hold positions, to withdraw, to redirect their efforts elsewhere. Orders flowed down the chain of command constantly, dozens of times throughout an operational day, from higher headquarters to battalion level, to company level, to squad level. But the Americans standing in that lobby, the captain and his 12 soldiers, were standing there because they had spent the previous 72 hours tracking a target through the streets of Baghdad, watching his movements, predicting his locations, preparing to take him into custody. A man, a name that had appeared in intelligence reports circulated through multiple agencies: the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, the CIA. The name appeared in detainee interrogation reports from several detention facilities scattered across Iraq and at Guantanamo Bay. The name appeared in signals intelligence intercepts collected by signal specialists working in secure facilities. The name was Jamil, though that was not his real name. His real name appeared in only 3 classified documents, all of which were compartmented above the captain's clearance level, compartmented above even the intelligence officer working with the captain. The Americans knew his face from a photograph taken at a wedding in Ramadi 6 months earlier, a photograph that had been recovered from a detainee's cell phone by military intelligence specialists. They knew his approximate location from cell phone tracking that had been conducted by signals intelligence specialists listening to Iraqi networks. They knew his associates from network analysis conducted by intelligence analysts working in air-conditioned facilities in Iraq and in the United States. They knew he was in the building, almost certainly, with a confidence rating of 78%, which meant that the intelligence had that specific probability attached to it that there was a 22% possibility that the intelligence was wrong, and they had been ordered to stand down precisely because he was in the building, precisely because someone else was about to arrive to take him, someone for whom Americans would step aside, someone who would do what the Americans were not supposed to do. The British Special Forces Regiment had been operating in Iraq for longer than most units. The regiment, formerly the 22 Special Air Service Regiment based at Credon Hill in Herefordshire, a centuries-old institution with roots stretching back to World War II, had arrived with the first wave of forces in March 2003, even before the invasion was formally declared complete on May 1st. The unit had rotated personnel multiple times over the intervening 3 years, maintaining the continuity of expertise while refreshing tired soldiers. But the SAS had maintained a continuous presence in Iraq throughout that period, establishing forward operating bases, developing relationships with local intelligence sources, building an understanding of the insurgency that was different from the understanding that the American military had developed. By 2006, they had conducted over 180 operations in the country, from small raids on safe houses to larger operations involving multiple teams and air support. They had killed or captured over 60 individuals who were designated as high-value targets by the American military's Joint Targeting Committee, individuals whose elimination or capture was believed to have strategic significance. They had operated with a level of autonomy that many American commanders found unusual and sometimes frustrating, while American Special Forces units, including the 75th Ranger Regiment based at Fort Benning, and units of the Special Forces Command, the Green Berets, answered to a centralized command structure known as the Joint Special Operations Task Force, a structure that maintained oversight over operations, coordinated with conventional forces, worked through formal request processes, and maintained rules of engagement that were written explicitly in American military regulations, in documents that could be cited and that required official approval to modify. The SAS maintained its own command structure. The SAS answered to British Special Operations Headquarters. The SAS had its own rules of engagement, written in language that was less explicit, that gave commanders more discretion, that included wording that could be interpreted different ways by different commanders in different circumstances. The SAS had its own definition of acceptable risk. The Americans knew this. They had discovered this through 3 years of operating alongside the SAS, 3 years of joint operations, 3 years of learning how the British did things. They respected it, largely, though with some degree of caution. And on that May afternoon, in that building in central Baghdad, they knew that when the SAS arrived, they would do something that the Americans had prepared to do but had not yet done. They would go into the building and they would take the target. They would do it in a way that the Americans, constrained by rules of engagement that required positive identification and authorization from multiple levels of command, that required documentation of the authorization, that required notification through multiple channels, could not do. They would do it with a level of speed and decisiveness that American military doctrine did not permit, not because Americans lacked the capability, but because Americans lacked the legal authority. The building itself was notable primarily for being unremarkable, 5 stories tall, rising above the surrounding structures. Constructed in 1987 of poured concrete during a period of Iraqi economic growth that would not last. Painted a light tan that had faded to a dusty beige after years of sun and sandstorms. Divided into apartments on the upper floors and commercial space on the ground level, a typical arrangement in Baghdad. The ground floor housed a fabric shop that had been closed since January 2005, when sectarian violence had made the neighborhood too dangerous for normal commercial activity, when shop owners began receiving threats from organized groups, when armed men would appear without explanation and inform businesses that they should close or face consequences that would be immediate and severe. Above it, on the second floor, was a family apartment where a retired teacher named Layla lived with her 3 unmarried daughters, all in their 20s. The family living on a pension that was insufficient to move to a safer neighborhood, that was insufficient to buy security or to relocate to areas where violence was less frequent. On the 3rd floor, in a smaller apartment that had been rented under the false name of a fictitious businessman, that had been rented for 6 months through an intermediary who never met the actual tenant, who simply collected the rent and asked no questions, the target had been living. He was believed to have received weapons training in Syria at a facility near Damascus, a facility that had trained hundreds of fighters from multiple nations. He was believed to have coordinated bomb-making operations that had resulted in the deaths of at least 19 Iraqi civilians in markets and on streets and in mosques, deaths that were documented in intelligence reports but that received no official recognition. He was believed to have connections to a network that stretched from central Iraq to the Syrian border, a network that involved cell leaders who directed operations, weapons suppliers who provided equipment, explosive material sources who provided the materials for bombs, and individuals who coordinated specific attacks on specific dates at specific locations. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was substantial enough to justify action. Cell phone records showed his number in proximity to cell towers that had been used before and after specific attacks, evidence that was technical but not conclusive. Detainee testimony, provided by 6 different individuals who had been captured in separate operations, linked him to specific bomb-making cells, testimony that was oral but that had come from multiple independent sources. Network analysis conducted by intelligence specialists suggested that he occupied a position of significant authority within the insurgent structure, that he had direct communication with senior leaders, that he was someone whose death or capture would disrupt operations across a significant geographic area. The American cordon was established at 3:15 in the afternoon under the command of the captain whose name was Andrew Brennan and who had been serving in Iraq for 4 months. 4 months of learning the streets, 4 months of conducting patrols, 4 months of participating in operations. 3 Humvees, each carrying a fire team of soldiers equipped with body armor, rated to stop rifle rounds up to 7.62 mm NATO standard, equipped with M4 rifles and ammunition organized in magazines holding 30 rounds each, equipped with night vision equipment in case darkness came before the operation concluded, equipped with radios that maintained constant communication with higher headquarters and with each other, established blocking positions at the three primary exits from the building. The primary entrance facing the main street, the service entrance on the eastern side that led into a narrow courtyard, the secondary exit on the western side that led into an alley that connected to a network of streets that could allow escape if access to the main routes was cut off. Additional personnel, 5 soldiers operating in pairs plus 1 team leader, occupied the rooftops of adjacent buildings, providing overwatch through rifle scopes, maintaining visual contact with the windows and doors of the target building, ready to suppress any armed figures that might attempt to escape, ready to provide covering fire if the Americans needed to withdraw. 2 Apache attack helicopters, called in from Camp Anaconda, 40 kilometers north, were circling above at a distance of approximately 2 kilometers, maintaining surveillance through their sophisticated optics that could distinguish individual human beings from the air, maintaining readiness to provide fire support through their 30mm chain guns and Hellfire missiles if the situation required it. The American plan was surgical in concept: extract the target from the building, take him to a secure facility at the forward operating base, interrogate him through trained interrogators who would apply psychological pressure and inducement techniques that were authorized under American regulations, regulations that had been written by the Department of Defense and that had been updated multiple times as the conflict progressed. Establish whether the intelligence about his role in bomb-making operations was accurate or whether the intelligence was flawed. If it was accurate, determine through interrogation what he knew about the networks that supported him, what he knew about other cell leaders, what he knew about Syrian-based operatives, what he knew about weapons suppliers and how they operated. If it was not accurate, if the intelligence was wrong, release him with an apology and a small payment for the disruption, approximately $500, money that the military maintained specifically for this purpose, compensating innocent Iraqis for false detention, money that acknowledged error but that did not acknowledge guilt. But at 3:27, 14 minutes after the cordon was established, after soldiers had been in position for less than 20 minutes, after the tension and focus that accompanied the initial moments of an operation had not yet diminished, the American captain received a message from higher headquarters. The message came through the radio that maintained the secure frequency. The message indicated that British forces would be arriving shortly. The message indicated that the Americans should maintain the cordon but should not enter the building. The message indicated that the SAS would take responsibility for the operation from that point forward. The message was brief, no more than 30 seconds of radio traffic, and it contained no explanation, no clarification about what would happen next, no indication of what the SAS intended to do. The captain was a professional soldier. He had attended military schools that had taught him the importance of understanding the broader strategic context. He had attended intelligence briefings that had explained how allied nations operated in Iraq. He understood that different units operated under different rules, different authorities, different command structures. He understood that British military law was different from American military law. He understood that British commanders had different constraints and different discretion than American commanders. He understood that the SAS, operating under rules that were not the same as his own, might be authorized to do things that he was not authorized to do. He did not understand exactly what those things were. He did not have access to the SAS rules of engagement, which were classified and compartmented even from American special operations commanders, compartmented above what Americans were normally cleared to see. He did not know what authorization they carried from their chain of command, what their rules of engagement actually said, what level of force they were authorized to employ. He did not know whether they were authorized to kill the target without warning, or capture him with less documentation than American procedures required, or conduct surveillance, or simply gather intelligence and leave him in place to be processed by the Americans later. He only knew that he was being told to stand down, that his operation was being put into a secondary role, that his responsibility for the target was being transferred to someone else. The SAS arrival was quiet and efficient. There were no vehicles that the Americans recognized. There were no radio communications on the American net that announced their arrival, no formal radio checks, no identification protocols. The first sign of their presence was when one of the American soldiers on the roof of an adjacent building, a sergeant named Miguel Ortiz, who had been maintaining visual observation of the target building, saw a figure in dark clothing climbing the exterior of the building across the street, moving up the side using hand and footholds that were barely visible, using crevices crevices in the concrete that most people would never notice, moving with a speed and efficiency that suggested training and practice and repetition, moving like a man who had done this exact action hundreds of times. The figure disappeared onto the roof. 30 seconds later, a second figure followed, ascending the same route, moving with the same speed, moving with the same efficiency. Then a third, then a fourth, then a fifth. Within 90 seconds, 5 SAS operators had reached the roof of the target building, without the Americans seeing any vehicle approach, without hearing any radio traffic that indicated they were arriving, without any announcement on any frequency that the British had entered the area. The Americans had been trained to recognize special operations tactics, trained to understand what professional military action looked like when it was conducted by experienced personnel. The Americans recognized what they were seeing. They recognized the speed and the coordination. They recognized the stealth. They recognized the competence. Something that looked like nothing but which was actually everything. The captain received a radio call from his battalion commander at the forward operating base. It was brief. His battalion commander, a major named Jeffries, who had been in Iraq for 2 months before this operation, and who had 8 months to go, said, "Let them work. Clear the streets within 100 meters. Maintain your cordon, but do not enter the building. Do not interfere. Do not provide support unless requested. Maintain radio silence on this frequency." The captain acknowledged. He passed the order to his soldiers. The Americans began clearing the streets of civilians who had been venturing out despite the military presence, children who had not fully understood the implications of seeing soldiers, vendors who had not yet retreated into their shops. The Americans settled into their positions and waited. What happened inside the building in the next 4 minutes was not witnessed by any American, not directly, not through any official observation channel. The Americans maintained their positions in the streets and on the rooftops, watching the exterior of the building, watching the streets, watching the approaches. The Americans heard the sound of controlled detonations, small explosions that were used to breach the locked door to the third-floor apartment, explosions that were far smaller and far quieter than the explosive charges that the Americans would have used, charges that would have been bigger and louder and more destructive. Explosions that indicated precision and practice and the knowledge that you needed to accomplish a specific task without damaging the surrounding structure more than necessary, without waking the retired teacher and her 3 daughters on the second floor. They heard no gunfire, they heard no screaming, they heard no shouting or indication of a struggle, no sounds of violence or resistance. They heard no indication that resistance had been encountered, no sounds of combat, no sounds that would indicate that the operation had deviated from plan, that the target had fought back, or that the SAS operators had encountered unexpected complications. The operation proceeded in silence and in darkness, in the kind of tactical silence that special operations units achieve when they are well trained and when they have planned operations carefully. At 3:34, 4 minutes after the first SAS operator had reached the roof, the Americans saw the figures emerge from the building. 5 dark figures moving down the external stairway that served as a fire exit, moving quickly but not running, moving with military discipline. And then a 6th figure, the target, moving quickly, being supported by the SAS operators, his arms pinned, his movement controlled. The man was not struggling. The man was not resisting. The man was moving quickly because that was the pace that was being forced upon him. Because the SAS operators who had control of him were moving with a military objective, moving with urgency, moving as though they had practiced this exact scenario dozens of times, as though the movement of an unwilling detainee from the 3rd floor to the street had been drilled and practiced and refined until it could be executed in perfect silence. Within seconds, a vehicle that had appeared from nowhere, that had not been visible to any of the Americans seconds earlier, a white Toyota sedan with tinted windows that had somehow materialized on the street, that had been waiting at a precise location at a precise time, pulled up to the entrance of the building. The SAS operators and the man disappeared into the vehicle. The vehicle departed, moving quickly but not so quickly as to draw attention, moving into the traffic of Baghdad, moving away from the building, moving away from the American cordon. From the moment the SAS operator had been visible on the roof to the moment the vehicle departed, 6 minutes had elapsed. The Americans were left in the street, standing down, maintaining their cordon, unclear about what had just happened and what they had just witnessed. They had heard explosions, they had heard movement, they had heard nothing that would indicate how the operation was actually conducted, what the SAS operators actually did when they entered the apartment, whether they encountered any resistance, whether the target was taken alive, or whether something else had happened. The captain radioed higher headquarters and reported, "Objective has been taken by British forces. All personnel accounted for, no American casualties, standing by for further instructions." His message was brief. His message was professional. His message acknowledged that the operation had been accomplished, but that he had no information about what had been accomplished or how. The target disappeared. The man whose name was Jamil, whose real name appeared in 3 classified documents, whose face had been in a photograph at a wedding in Ramadi 6 months earlier, whose cell phone had been tracked through Baghdad for 72 hours, whose movements had been observed and plotted and anticipated, whose associates had been monitored and analyzed and evaluated. That man was transferred to a facility whose location has never been disclosed. The facility may have been in Baghdad, it may have been in Basra, it may have been in Jordan or Syria or somewhere else entirely. The location was never revealed. He was interrogated by personnel whose agency has never been disclosed. So personnel who may have been British military intelligence, who may have been officers from the Joint Intelligence Committee, who may have been CIA officers operating in Iraq, who may have been some combination of allied intelligence services working in cooperation, who may have been contractors working for private military companies that specialized in interrogation and intelligence analysis. He was kept in a facility whose legal status remains ambiguous, a facility that was not an official military detention facility listed on any official roster, a facility that operated outside the normal system, a facility whose procedures remain classified, whose conditions remain unknown, whose very existence may be denied by the governments involved. The United States government has never issued a statement about his fate. The British government has never issued a statement about what happened to him. His family, if he has family, assuming they are still alive and still seeking information about him, has never been contacted by any official agency from either nation. He has not appeared in any detainee database available to the public. He has not appeared in any official record of detentions. He simply ceased to exist in the visible record. He became what American military personnel referred to as a ghost detainee, a person held in a location outside the normal system, outside the normal record-keeping procedures, outside the normal accountability structures, outside the normal legal frameworks that were supposed to govern detention and interrogation. The operation itself was documented only in classified British military records that have never been released. The Americans filed reports about the cordon they had established. They noted the arrival of British forces. They noted their instruction to stand down. They noted the departure of the British forces with a detainee. They noted the time and the location and the date. They documented their own participation in the operation, their cordoning of the building, their observation of the streets, their cooperation with the British forces. But what the British forces actually did inside the building remained classified. What they found inside the building remained classified. What they saw when they entered the third-floor apartment remained classified. What authority they were operating under remained classified. What their orders actually said remained classified. Whether they had orders to capture him alive or orders to take whatever measures were necessary remained classified. Whether interrogation occurred in that building or somewhere else remained classified. What happened to him after the operation remained classified. Whether he was released after providing intelligence or whether he remained in custody or whether he was killed remained classified. The entire operation, from the moment the first SAS operator reached the roof to the moment the vehicle disappeared into traffic, existed in a state of classification that made it impossible for an outsider to know what actually happened. The distinction between what the Americans could do and what the SAS could do rested on a subtle but significant legal difference that had never been explicitly articulated in any official briefing, that had never been formally acknowledged in any policy document, that had been understood by everyone involved but never spoken in any official setting. The Americans were conducting operations under American military law. American military law is explicit about the standards required to detain someone in a combat zone. A commander may detain someone based on intelligence indicating that the person poses a threat, based on suspicion that rises above mere possibility, but American law requires that the person be treated as a prisoner of war or as a civilian detainee subject to specific procedures. The intelligence must be shared through the command structure. The detention must be documented. The detainee must be transferred to a facility within 30 days, where his status can be reviewed by an officer who is not involved in the original detention decision. His family must eventually be notified. His detention must be recorded in a central database. He has rights, limited though those rights may be in a combat environment. The SAS was operating under British military law. British military law in 2006 was less explicit about these procedures. British military law permitted commanders considerable discretion in the detention of persons in a combat zone. British military law did not require the same level of documentation or the same notifications to families. British military law did not require that detainees be transferred to a centralized facility within a specific time frame. British military law had different provisions regarding interrogation authority and the methods that were permissible. The result was that the SAS could legally do things in Iraq that the Americans could not legally do. The SAS could detain someone with less documentation. The SAS could hold someone in a location outside the regular system. The SAS could operate with less oversight. The Americans understood this. The Americans accepted this. The Americans facilitated this. The captain, standing in the street in Baghdad, understood that he had just been asked to step aside so that someone else could do something that he could not do. What exactly that something was remained unclear. But he understood that it was significant, that it was the reason why he had been told to stand down in the first place. He understood that it was outside the boundaries of what American law permitted, outside the boundaries of American military procedure, outside the boundaries of what American doctrine recognized as acceptable. He understood that British law, whatever it actually said, permitted something different, something that American law did not permit. He understood that the operation had been successful in some sense, that the target had been taken from the building, that the objective had been achieved without American soldiers doing the taking. He understood that his role was now complete, that his function as the commander of the force that would extract the target had been superseded, that his authority had been transferred to someone else. He understood that he should stand down and should not ask further questions about what would happen next, about where the target would be taken, about how he would be interrogated, about what would happen to him ultimately. The instruction to stand down was not the end of the operation. It was the beginning of something else, something that he was no longer part of, something that existed in a legal and geographic space that was different from the space that he occupied. That understanding, that recognition, was the crucial element. The Americans had accepted that there were operations that could not be conducted under American law, and that those operations would be conducted under different law, conducted by different soldiers, conducted in different locations, conducted in ways that remained classified and unknown, conducted in ways that would not be reported through American intelligence channels, conducted in ways that would not be documented in American records. By accepting this, by standing down, by clearing the streets and maintaining the cordon and not asking further questions, the Americans were accepting a reality about military operations in Iraq. They were accepting that American law had limits. They were accepting that those limits could be exceeded by allied nations. They were accepting that this was not an aberration, but was part of how the war was actually being fought. They were accepting that there existed a category of operations that could not be discussed, could not be reported, could not be acknowledged, but that could be observed happening in the streets of Baghdad. By 2006, American commanders and soldiers had become accustomed to this arrangement. They had become accustomed to stepping aside so that others could do what they could not do. They had become accustomed to not asking questions. They had become accustomed to understanding that their role had limits, that those limits were defined by American law, that American law was not adequate to the situation in Iraq, that other nations' law would have to supplement American law, that other nations' soldiers would have to conduct operations that American soldiers could not conduct. This acceptance, this normalization, this understanding that there were things that could not be asked and things that could not be said, was itself a kind of transformation. It was a transformation of what the American military understood itself to be, a transformation of what the American military understood American law to be, a transformation of what the American military understood the war in Iraq to require.